The late spring dusk settled gently over our neighborhood, casting long, golden tendrils of light across manicured lawns and the tidy rows of maple and oak trees lining the street. From my armchair by the living room window, I watched as a soft breeze rustled the new leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of freshly mown grass and blooming lilacs. Over the years, that scent had become as comforting to me as the warmth of Irene's hand in mine or the familiar creak of this old house's front door. I always treasured these quiet evenings. After 40 years of work, first in the city, then from home after retirement, I had come to relish the stillness that preceded nightfall. The chores were done, the dishwasher hummed quietly in the kitchen, and the ceramic plates and glasses we used for dinner lay neatly stacked beside the sink. Irene and I had shared a simple meal of roast chicken, steamed asparagus, and her famous mashed potatoes, followed by a single slice of rhubarb pie, tart and sweet with just enough whipped cream to soften the edges. The comforting routine of the evening felt like a gentle ritual, grounding us in the life we had built together. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the contentment that bubbled up inside me. In one breath, I could feel every warm memory, the day we first moved into this house, young newlyweds buzzing with excitement. Our son's first tentative steps across this carpet, the laughter of grandchildren chasing each other through the rooms. Those memories were woven into the very foundation of these walls. Behind me, the television murmured an evening news report about an international summit, voices discussing trade agreements and climate pledges in measured, urgent tones. I only half listened, my mind drifting instead to more personal matters, Lucas's upcoming business trip, the new novel Irene was reading, the garden outside begging for a little more attention before the roses bloomed. I glanced at the mantel, where family photographs stood in orderly frames, our wedding day in black and white, Irene's radiant smile lit by a spring sun, Lucas at age 6, clinging to my hand under the carnival lights, a more recent shot of him in his graduation gown. At Cornell, mortarboard tilted jauntily. Even in that still image, I could almost hear his laughter echoing down the hall. He'd always been the kind of boy who filled a room with energy, whose boundless enthusiasm could turn a dull afternoon into an adventure. A low hum pulled me back to the present. I reached for my phone, lying face up on the coffee table. The screen was dark except for one blinking notification, a missed call from our next-door neighbor asking if we'd mind picking them up from the airport early tomorrow. I tapped the alert, then hit a call back, hoping to catch them before they left the gate. Before the dial tone even had a chance to settle, my phone buzzed again, this time with an incoming call. The name that appeared on the screen sent a jolt through me, Lucas. Not Lucas Study Group, not Lucas Cricket Club, just Lucas. My pulse quickened. I hadn't heard his voice in a week, not since our last video call when he'd been in London presenting at a medical conference. He'd sounded tired but excited. I set the neighbor's call aside, holding the phone with a sudden weight in my hand. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Everything okay?" There was a pause, longer than usual. I glanced over at Irene, who was perched on the edge of the couch with a cookbook in her lap. She looked up, curious. Her eyes met mine. I shook my head slightly, silently urging him to speak. Finally, Lucas's calm, measured voice came through. "Hi, Dad. I'm okay. Just calling to give you a heads up about something." A flicker of concern washed over me. "Sure. What's up?" "I'm getting married tomorrow," he said, as if reciting a weather forecast, his tone almost clinical. I stared at the phone, words stuck in my throat. The plants outside were still swaying in the breeze, the evening light remained warm and golden. Yet in that moment, everything felt off-kilter, as if the world had tilted on its axis. "Tomorrow?" I managed. He drew a breath. "Tomorrow at noon, Central European Time. Table for 50, small chapel outside the city. It'll be quick. You don't need to worry about logistics, Jess and I have arranged everything. Oh, and I sold the car. And the house. So there's nothing left to worry about on that front either. I'll send you the details." His words landed like heavy stones in my chest. I could hear the distant shuffle of his fiancée, Jess, murmuring something about flowers or catering. There was a polite laugh in the background. Lucas sounded composed, almost detached, as though he were updating me on the weather, not dismantling our family's life as we knew it. My grip on the phone tightened. Lucas, you sold your car? And the house?
Yeah.
We're starting fresh, he said. You know I've been thinking about this for a while. But you never said anything, I whispered, voice catching. Not to your mother, not to me. Nothing. How could you make decisions like that without telling us until the night before? It just made sense, he replied. I don't want to hold on to the past. I want to move forward without extra baggage. Silence fell. I wanted to argue, to list all the reasons why selling that car, a car I'd gifted him on his 25th birthday, was reckless. I longed to remind him how many memories we'd made in that house, how that place was as much a part of his history as it was ours. But in that moment, his voice felt too distant, too final. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. Where will you live? I asked, fighting for calm. Zurich, he said. Jess has a job there, and I'll take up a postdoc position. At ETH. It's perfect. You're staying in Europe, then, I said, tone hollow. I might book a flight tomorrow morning. He hesitated. Dad, you don't need to. Really? I'll video call you after the ceremony. My heart sank as he began to say,
Goodbye.
Lucas, please. Let me see you. Talk to me. But the line went dead. The television's soft drone felt intrusive. Now. Irene rose and came to stand beside me. I stared at the blank screen of the phone, the name Lucas still illuminated. My son was getting married in less than 24 hours, and the house I thought he'd cherish, our family home, no longer belonged to him. The weight of that one call pressed down on me, and for the first time in years, the familiar comfort of our evening routine felt fragile, uncertain, like the window's glass threatened to shatter under a single, sharp tap. I set the phone down and sank back into the armchair, the golden light outside beginning to fade into twilight. The clock ticked loudly on the mantel, each second a reminder that tomorrow would be different. And tonight, in the quiet hush of our living room, I realized just how much I had taken for granted, and how drastically everything was about to change. The instant Lucas's voice cut through the line, a cold knot cinched in my chest. His words were precise, clipped, I'm getting married tomorrow, as if he were reading from a script, not announcing the single most life-altering event I'd ever heard. Time seemed to stutter. The soft glow of the living room lamp dimmed into a dull halo, the ticking of the clock on the mantel slowed to a reluctant drip. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. What? I managed, voice thick as molasses. My armchair, once so familiar and inviting, felt suddenly alien, tilting beneath me. Irene, alerted by the sudden hitch in my tone, rose from her seat and hurried over. Her eyes, wide with concern, flicked between my face and the phone's screen. Lucas, she whispered, half question, half prayer. Tomorrow, he repeated. Steady and unhurried. My breath caught on the word, tomorrow. How could everything change so fast? I pictured the calendar on my nightstand back home, the date July 10th, 2025, boxed in neat pen strokes. A day filled with routine appointments, a bridge club meeting for Irene, perhaps a quiet dinner party with neighbors. Yet here, on the other end of the line, my son was poised to exchange vows in a foreign church, his future forever redirected. He went on, words pouring out in a matter-of-fact rush, we sold the house. I signed the final papers this afternoon. As for the car, it's gone too, picked up by the dealer an hour ago. Jess and I are leaving for Zurich tonight. Everything's arranged, flight, hotel, paperwork. There was a pause, as though he expected me to congratulate him. I should have let you know sooner, he added. Sorry about the short notice. I sank deeper into the armchair, wincing as the realization spread through me like wildfire. The tangible ties to his past, the blue Honda Civic I'd helped him pick out, the rooms he'd grown up in, the yard where he'd learned to kick a ball, had vanished without a trace. The cul-de-sac of our neighborhood, the summer cookouts, the impromptu talent shows in our living room, all memories lodged in bricks and mortar, in engine hum and tire tread, now sold away in a single transaction. Irene's hand found mine. Her grip gentle but insistent. "Lucas," she called softly, though I knew he couldn't hear her from so many time zones away. Tears welled in her eyes, reflecting the soft lamplight. "Our home," she began, her voice trailing off. I shut my eyes, picturing the hallway where family photos hung, the kitchen where we'd shared countless meals. It was as if someone had declared war on the past, and won. My own words felt inadequate, weighed down by shock and grief. "What? About your things?" I croaked. "Your books, your records, everything you kept in that attic?" He paused again, and I held my breath, half expecting him to say he'd boxed them up for us to store, that he'd taken care to preserve his heritage. But the answer was swift and merciless. Jess and I packed what we needed. The rest went to charity. "Really, Dad, it's no big deal." His calm detachment struck like a blade. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just the resolute closure of an old chapter. In the silence that followed, the room felt too large, too empty. The television's muted news report, once background noise, now seemed jarringly irrelevant. My mind raced through every conversation I'd had with Lucas in recent months, his offhand mention of wanting to simplify, his excited talk of European opportunities, the giggle as he showed me selfies with Jess against the backdrop of Zurich's old town. I had heard the undercurrent but never grasped its force. "Is there anything I can do?" I found myself asking, voice trembling. "Anything at all?" But his answer, when it came, offered no solace. "No, Dad. You've done more than enough." And with a stifled click, the line went dead. I stared at the silent phone, its black screen a mirror of the void growing inside me. Behind me, Irene closed her eyes, leaning against my shoulder. Her breath soft with sorrow. The ordinary evening we had known, roasted chicken on the table, the garden scents drifting in, the warm glow of home, had slipped through our fingers, untethered from our control. In its place stood a moment of irrevocable change, the instantaneous fracturing of our family's life, the echo of our son's final
Goodbye.
and the cold realization that tomorrow, he would be a stranger at a wedding we might not attend, our home sold and our hearts caught unawares. Tomorrow, everything would be different, forever. The night stretched before us like a dark sea, its black waters broken only by the flicker of streetlights outside our window. Irene and I sat at the small kitchen table, our usual Saturday morning spot, now cluttered with open maps and flight schedules and scribbled notes. The buzzing refrigerator and the hum of the oven timer felt intrusive in the tense silence, even the ritual of setting 2 mugs of hot tea between us seemed surreal. Every time I looked at Irene's drawn face, her eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, my own resolve wavered. But there was no room for doubt. We had to reach Lucas before tomorrow's ceremony. I sipped my tea, its warmth barely penetrating the chill in my chest. "We need to leave tonight," I said, my voice sounding too firm to be true. "The earliest flight out of Bucharest is at 22:45, lands in Zurich at 1:30 local time. There's a connection to the town where the chapel is." I pointed at the printout, 2 more legs, 3 hours of rail travel, and a final taxi ride down winding mountain roads. Even if we managed it, we'd arrive mere hours before the wedding. But it was our only chance. Irene brushed a curl away from her face. "I understand," she whispered. "We'll pack spare clothes, toiletries, enough for 2 days." Her words trembled on her lips. I could almost hear her thoughts ricocheting. What would we say to Lucas when we saw him? How would Jess react? Could we still persuade our son to call the wedding off? I nodded and stood up to pace the small kitchen. The linoleum under my feet felt sticky and cold. I reached for my phone and began dialing the car service we'd used when we first moved here 20 years ago. I needed them to take us to the Airport, no hesitation, no waiting. Yes, Mr. Andre? It's Gabriel Ionescu. I need your earliest car, please, now. The driver would be there within 20 minutes, the dispatcher assured me. 20 minutes until the real race began. I glanced at the clock. It was already 9:15 p.m. 2 hours to the flight, a scant margin to navigate check-in, security lines, and customs. I closed my eyes, recalling Lucas's childhood football matches in our front yard, him sprinting across the grass with reckless joy, me and Irene cheering from the porch, so certain he'd always come home afterward. Tonight, we were chasing our son across time zones, hoping he would still open the door when we arrived. The car pulled up and hissed its brakes against the asphalt. I helped Irene with her bags, 2 modest rolling suitcases, one for me, one for her, and we climbed into the back seat. The driver, a kindly man with a heavy Bukovina accent, gave me a sympathetic look in the rearview mirror. Big trip, he asked gently. It's urgent, I said, interpreting his glance. Our son. He's, well, we need to see him before tomorrow. He nodded, eyes soft. I'll get you there as quickly as I can, sir. Outside, the neighborhood lay quiet, the hedges of our neighbors' yards trimmed to geometric perfection. The mailboxes empty in the late hour. Soon we were on the boulevard, the city lights stretching into a glittering ribbon, as if urging us on. I clenched and unclenched my fists in my lap, thoughts racing. Flight tickets. Passport. Hotel booking confirmation, though Irene insisted on booking nothing until we spoke to Lucas. Emergency numbers for airlines. I whispered reminders to myself as the car sped down the road to AT Otapini Airport. The departure hall was a hive of activity under fluorescent lights. We surged through the crowd, Irene clutching our passports and boarding passes. A kind-faced agent at the check-in desk eyed my shaking hands and waved us to the priority line. We exchanged quick glances, relief flickering in our eyes, then hurried forward. Zurich, please, I said, stepping to the counter. The agent scanned our documents and slid our tickets across. Boarding begins in 20 minutes at gate 14B. Enjoy your flight. Her polite smile felt like a lifeline. I pressed my hand to Irene's forearm. We're on our way. The security line snaked forward, travelers milled about, unaware of our urgency. Irene and I passed through swiftly, then found ourselves in the terminal with 1 hour to spare. We bought 2 bottled waters. She set her bag on the floor and sank onto a bench, head in her hands. Gabriel, she murmured, I'm so worried. I crouched beside her, brushing back a strand of silver hair. I know. But we'll get to him. We just have to believe he'll let us see him. We sat in silence until the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Rising, we made our way to the gate. Behind the glass windows, jets taxied in dusk-lit puddles, their engines hissing in the twilight. I wondered if the pilots had any idea of the drama unfolding within Gate 14B, a father and mother hurtling across Europe, their son's wedding hanging in the balance. Once aboard, we settled into our seats and strapped in. Irene closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her. I stared out at the tarmac, heart pounding as if I were the one taking off. When the captain's voice crackled over the speaker, confirming our departure time and expected arrival, I closed my own eyes and prayed at the plane climbed into the night sky, leaving the familiar contours of Romania behind. I pulled out my phone again, tempted to call Lucas, but remembered his earlier words, he didn't want us to come. So instead, I texted, brief and pleading, Mom and Dad are on their way. Please let us see you. Love you. No response. But I told myself it was too soon, he had to be busy with final wedding preparations. Hours passed in restless slumber, my palms damp on the armrests, Irene's head leaning against the window. When the cabin lights flickered on for the descent, I sat up, heart pounding anew. The cold air of Zurich enveloped us as we disembarked. We followed signs to the rail station within the airport, boarding the night train to Lucerne, where our small printout said we'd change for the regional express to the chapel town. The train rattled on thin tracks, the landscape ghosted by the glow of moonlight. Alpine silhouettes rose and fell in the distance. The air smelled of pine and cold stone. I checked the time. It was 3:15 a.m. Central European Time. With 2 connections left and a final taxi ride, we were still hours from the chapel. I looked at Irene's sleeping form and realized we might never arrive before the ceremony began. My chest tightened with fear. What if Lucas refused to see us? What if we reached the empty chapel, sun rising over its stone walls, our son already wed, by the time we tumbled out onto the foggy platform of the chapel town station? Exhaustion had turned to adrenaline. We hauled our bags into a waiting taxi under the driver's admonishing glare. This time of night, you need to be quick. The cab sped along narrow roads framed by dark pines, headlights slicing through the mist. I checked my watch one last time. 5:45 a.m. The chapel tower loomed in the distance, its bell silent in the pre-dawn hush. We exchanged determined glances. Though we might not get to Lucas in time, we would stand at his wedding, even if only as the frantic parents who crossed half a continent on a single night. We pulled up to the front door, and the taxi driver helped us unload. Irene twisted her wedding band anxiously. I smoothed my wrinkled shirt and squared my shoulders. We were here. Whether Lucas would open the door or turn us away was out of our hands. But we would be here, ready, parents racing against time, driven by love and the hope of one last chance to make our son understand just how much he mattered. A pale wash of dawn crept over the chapel's stone walls, turning the ivy-draped facade to a soft shade of rose. Irene and I stood at the edge of the gravel path, our suitcases behind us, our breaths visible in the cool morning air. The church doors remained closed, and the only sounds were the restless scuttling of sparrows among the tombstones and the distant tolling of the village bell. In the hush, memories rushed in like floodwaters. I closed my eyes and was transported back 25 years, to the day we moved into that old Victorian house on Maple Avenue. Lucas was barely a toddler, clutching a single cardboard box labeled toys with one chubby fist, while his other hand curled tight around mine. We had carried him across the threshold, his eyes wide with wonder at the grand staircase, the bay window, the squeak of every floorboard. That house had been our promise to him, a place to grow, to dream, to come home. Irene reached out, brushing a strand of mist-laden hair from my forehead. Remember his first steps, she whispered. Right here on this path. She pointed to the chapel's walkway, where the grass met the gravel. I could almost see the image, little Lucas, stumbling forward, arms outstretched, as I knelt on the ground shouting, "Come on, buddy, you can do it." He'd wobbled, fallen backward into my arms, and then burst into joyous giggles that echoed against the church walls. In that laughter lay all the promise of childhood, invincibility, hope, the belief that every tomorrow was open to possibility. But along with that hope came responsibility, and sometimes, blinders. As Lucas grew older, I became determined he should follow a safe path, excel in school, earn scholarships, secure a stable career. I poured my heart into coaching his little league team, quizzing him on history facts at the dinner table, driving him to piano lessons I thought would cultivate discipline. I remember the night he burst into tears in his bedroom after I insisted he tutor a struggling classmate, saying, "Dad, I need to hang out with my friends." I'd shrugged it off, thinking it was part of growing up. Now I wondered if those small dismissals had taught him to keep his true feelings locked away. Irene's breath caught, and I turned to find her eyes glistening. "I should have listened more," she murmured. "When he talked about simplifying his life, I thought it was just a phase. I never pressed him." I felt the sting of regret, the countless evenings we'd spent bemoaning our own cluttered schedule, longing for a quieter pace, while Lucas quietly mapped out his future, alone. Had we ever asked him what he really wanted? The chapel door creaked open then, startling us. A bridesmaid hovered on the threshold, checking her watch. She offered a polite nod, and I realized with a jolt that she'd seen us. "Your son said he'd arrive early," she said quietly. "He'll come to greet you when he's ready." Relief and anxiety warred inside me. We had made it, yet still, the gulf between us yawned wide. As she retreated, Irene slipped her arm through mine. "Let's get some coffee," she suggested. I saw a cafe down the lane that opens early. We wheeled our suitcases along the chapel's side path, dew soaking the hems of our pants. The village was waking, shop shutters rattled open, a baker set fresh loaves to cool in a window rack, and a bicycle clattered past, its rider waving a sleepy greeting. In that gentleness, I found a measure of peace. Inside the cafe, the scent of ground beans and baking croissants enveloped us. A small heater crackled in the corner, and we slid into a wooden booth. The barista, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, brought us 2 steaming cups and a plate of almond pastries. As Irene sipped, her shoulders eased, and I let my memories drift to the day I taught Lucas to drive our old Civic. I'd stood by the passenger door, heart hammering, while he nervously eased the car down Maple Avenue. Every brake light ahead felt like a warning of my own fears. Would I protect him enough? Would I let him go when the time came? I closed my eyes against the cafe's warm light, replaying his first faltering clutch control, the triumphant grin when we circled back without incident. That was the moment I realized that love means letting go, trusting that the foundation you've given is solid enough to carry them forward. But somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that lesson in the rush of everyday life. I looked at Irene, who was staring into her cup. No matter what happens today, I said softly, we have to let him make his own choice. She nodded, tears spilling silently. For better or worse, she agreed. Because that's what marriage is, too, choosing each other, even when it's hard. We finished our coffee and stepped back into the morning light, suitcases in tow. The chapel steeple glowed atop the hill, and I felt the weight of our regrets lift, replaced by resolve. We would greet Lucas not as disappointed parents, but as 2 people who had learned, sometimes painfully, that love is an act of faith. We would offer him our blessing, even if it meant watching him walk a path we did not fully understand. As we approached the chapel doors, I inhaled deeply. The world felt new, as if this quiet village dawn were a canvas awaiting the first brushstroke of forgiveness. And there, on the threshold of my son's future, I vowed to step forward with an open heart, ready to stand beside him, whatever awaited us inside. A chill still clung to the air as the first tendrils of dawn brushed the chapel's stained glass windows with pale apricot light. Irene and I stood at the threshold, our suitcases resting against the stone wall, the morning stillness wrapping around us like a held breath. Through the open door, I could make out a handful of workers, a florist assembling pew decorations, a baker's assistant laying out trays of petit fours on a side table, and 2 men in crisp dress shirts adjusting the aisle runner. All were absorbed in their tasks, as though the world were about to begin anew. I took a steadying breath. Are you ready? I asked Irene quietly. She nodded, her grip tightening around my arm. Ready as I'll ever be. I crossed the threshold first, the wooden floor cool under my shoes. As I stepped forward, my heart hammered so loud I wondered if the echo would betray me. We walked down the side aisle, far enough for privacy but close enough to the altar where Lucas would stand. Each polished pew looked immaculate, every rose petal carefully placed. It was the kind of perfection people strive for their whole lives, orderly, beautiful, unblemished. And yet it felt almost cruel in its serenity, a stark contrast to the chaos of our emotions. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared at the far end of the aisle. Lucas, tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that fit him like a second skin, stood with his back straight, shoulders squared. His hair was neatly combed, and from this distance, he looked every inch the groom in control of his destiny. As he turned, our eyes locked. He halted mid-step, surprise flickering across his face before he schooled it into calm. Mom. Dad, he said, voice quiet but unmistakably serious. I swallowed hard. Lucas, I began, my throat tight as wire. Thank you for letting us come. He inclined his head once, expression unreadable. You're here. Though simple, those words carried more weight than any welcome. I nodded, swallowing another lump. Lucas, Irene said, stepping forward so that father and son stood only a few feet apart, we're sorry. We never meant to, he raised a hand, silencing her. You never meant to sell the house without telling me? You never meant to call at midnight and tell me I have to abandon my life? You never meant to invite yourselves to my wedding when you didn't think I needed you? His words stung with hurt and irony. I glanced at Irene, saw her lips tremble. Son, please, I said, voice low. I'm sorry we waited until the last minute. We were terrified we'd miss you, but you did miss me, he cut in, stepping closer. You've missed every choice I've made for the past year. Did you even know I was serious about Jess? Or did you think it was just another project I would abandon when it got inconvenient? I looked into his eyes that once looked at me with trusting wonder, now brimming with battle-worn resolve. I realized then how far he'd traveled, how many conversations we'd never had. We wanted to protect you, I said, gently. To keep you safe. Protect me, he echoed, incredulous. By selling my home? By deciding for me what I needed and when? All I ever wanted was for you to trust me. My chest tightened. You were always our little boy, I whispered. We didn't see the man you were becoming. He shook his head. That's precisely it. You saw the boy you raised. You thought I needed you more than you needed me. But Jess saw the man. In me. She gave me the space to choose. He paused, glancing toward the chapel's side door. She's here, Dad. Waiting. At the mention of her name, something in me shifted. I realized this wasn't about us keeping Lucas close, it was about him stepping into his own life. I swallowed my pride. Lucas, please, I began, but he lifted a hand again. Let me finish, he said softly. I love you. You know that, right? Tears pooled in Irene's eyes, and I felt my own vision blur. We love you, I managed. Then trust me now, he implored. Trust that I know what I'm doing. He reached out, his hand hovering uncertainly between us. I wanted you here. Not because I needed you to fix things, because I want you to be part of this, of my new life. But I couldn't ask you until I was sure. Until I knew I could stand on my own. I looked at his hand, so near, trembling slightly. Everything I had ever known, every lesson taught, every memory treasured, crashed together in that moment. The auditorium of my heart echoed with a single truth: my son was grown, and his happiness no longer depended on my approval. Tears slid down my cheeks. I swallowed and nodded, extending my hand. I trust you, I said, my voice breaking. We trust you. He clasped my hand firmly, a gesture at once familiar and profoundly new. Thank you, he whispered. Irene stepped forward, enveloping him in a warm embrace. The three of us stood there, a father, mother, son, bound not by the walls of a childhood home, but by the realization that love sometimes means letting go. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jess approaching, radiant in a simple ivory gown, bouquet of garden roses in hand. Her eyes met mine, and she offered a gentle, understanding smile. In that instant, I knew Lucas's choice was right. As the chapel doors swung open wider, beckoning guests to take their seats, I took a final, steadying breath. Today would be a new beginning for all of us, a day where forgiveness bridged past mistakes, and trust wove us together afresh. Side by side, we walked down the aisle, not as fractured parents desperate to hold on, but as a family ready to step into the future, united, unafraid, and filled with hope. The chapel doors opened with a soft creak as the morning light spilled into the nave, illuminating the rose-patterned stained glass and gilded arches overhead. The aisle, now perfectly laid with a pale ivory runner, beckoned like a path toward new beginnings. Guests murmured softly from carved wooden pews, colleagues, neighbors from Lucas's apartment building in Geneva, Jess's circle of friends from Zurich. All eyes turned as we entered, Irene and I, flanked by two hesitant groomsmen, stepping forward together to join the congregation. I felt the hush cloak me in a mixture of reverence and wonder. This was the moment of promise, the tipping point between past and future. As I took my seat, the familiar scent of beeswax candles and fresh lavender filled the air. The organist struck a single note, and soon a soft prelude drifted through the rafters. Lucas stood at the front, his hand gently resting on the wooden pulpit as he waited, his profile cast in golden light. He turned, offering me a small, reassuring smile that seemed to say, "Thank you for coming." When Jess appeared at the end of the aisle, her train trailing like silken waves, her lace veil catching the light, I felt an ache of astonishment. She moved with serene confidence, eyes alight with joy, her bouquet of peonies and peony pink roses cradled in her arms. Each step she took seemed in perfect harmony with the music, as if her heart had composed it. Irene reached for my hand, both of us swallowing the lump in our throats. We watched as Lucas stood to his full height, gaze fixed on his bride, and Irene's tears finally broke free in unashamed joy. The ceremony was a tapestry of heartfelt vows and tender rituals. The officiant, a kindly local pastor who spoke English with a gentle accent, welcomed everyone in both Romanian and German. He spoke of love as the greatest gift, a force that lifts us beyond ourselves, and invited Lucas and Jess to share their promises. Lucas's voice was steady but rich with feeling as he spoke. "Jess, you have shown me what it is to love without reservation, to trust without fear. From this day forward, I promise to stand by you, to listen with an open heart, and to cherish every moment we share." Jess answered with equal warmth, "Lucas, in you I found my home. I promise to nurture your dreams, to laugh with you in joy, to comfort you in sorrow, and to walk beside you through all the days of our life." As they exchanged rings, simple bands that glinted in the morning light, the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. A collective breath seemed to release from the assembled friends and family, and then applause rippled through the chapel like gentle waves. When the ceremony concluded, the bride and groom stepped back onto the steps of the altar, hand in hand. Music swelled, a bright, folk-inspired tune, and they led the recessional, shining with new beginnings. Outside, the courtyard had been arranged for a small reception, long wooden tables topped with linen runners and mason jars of wildflowers. Candles nestled among sprigs of rosemary, low lanterns awaiting the coming dusk. Irene and I found ourselves side by side as the newlyweds descended the aisle, and we embraced them both in turn. Jess's eyes shone with gratitude as she hugged me. "Thank you for trusting us," she whispered. And Lucas, ever the eloquent one, pressed my hands in his. "I needed you here," he said simply. "Thank you for believing." Throughout the reception, stories and laughter wove into the warm afternoon. I heard colleagues laugh about Lucas's notorious thesis defense, friends teasing Jess about her obsession with early morning hikes. Every anecdote felt like a testament to how well they'd been seen, how deeply they were loved. Irene joined Jess and the other bridesmaids for an impromptu bouquet arrangement, while I lingered near the table where Lucas's classmates from Cornell, now scattered across Europe, raised toasts to the best lab partner, and the most fearless adventurer. When the last of the speeches concluded, I rose to say a few words. My heart pounded as I cleared my throat. "I stood here this morning, a father proud and a parent humbled. Watching you both today, I realized that love isn't about holding on, it's about letting go and trusting that the roots we've planted will grow strong in new soil. Lucas, Jess, may your life together be richer than any home we could have built, and may your love light every path you walk." To the bride and groom. Glasses clinked, and a "here," rang out. I felt tears sting my eyes, but they were of joy, of surrender, of hope. The sun dipped lower as the gathering moved to the edge of a small pond, lanterns now aglow. We released floating candles into the water, each a silent wish for health, happiness, and the adventures ahead. Irene and I stood hand in hand on the grassy bank, watching the lights drift, and I felt a peace that had eluded me since Lucas's late-night call. I understood then that while a house can be sold and a car can be given away, the home within our hearts is unshakable. As the evening drew to a close, guests trickled away under the rosy sky. We hugged Jess's parents, promising to meet again in Zurich. Lucas walked us back to the chapel steps, pausing to place a gentle hand on each of our shoulders. "I love you both," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming all this way." We watched him disappear down the lantern-lined path with Jess, their figures blending into the soft glow of twilight. Irene rested her head on my shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. "Yes," I answered, eyes fixed on the fading lights. "We did." And in that moment, standing on foreign soil, our son embarking on a life we barely recognized as our own, I knew that love had woven a new kind of home, one without walls but built on trust, blessing, and the courage to let go. Our chapter together had not ended, it had simply found its next beginning.